It was a crisp Sunday morning in the small town of Meadow Creek, the kind of morning where the air smelled like coffee and fresh-cut grass, and families gathered for worship at the century-old Trinity Baptist Church. The bell rang loud and proud, but no one noticed the unease in the air, except for Hunter. Hunter was no ordinary German shepherd. Trained as a K-9 unit, his senses were sharper than any man's. And that morning, as families hugged and shook hands in front of the old white church, Hunter's nose twitched at something no one else seemed to notice. His handler, Deputy Sarah Miller, thought it was just another routine patrol. But Hunter wasn't acting like it was routine. Not at all. As Pastor James Foster stood at the pulpit, smiling his warm, familiar smile, the kind that made you feel safe in a place like Meadow Creek, Hunter lunged. His deep guttural bark sliced through the hymn like a warning siren. The entire congregation fell silent, turning in shock as Hunter's paws scratched furiously at the old wooden floorboards. Beneath the pulpit, people gasped. Children cried. And Pastor James? His smile didn't reach his eyes anymore. For a moment, no one moved. Then Hunter's bark grew more aggressive. His eyes locked on Pastor James as if he could see something the rest of them couldn't. Something dark, something buried. Sarah yanked on the leash, but Hunter wouldn't budge. His body was rigid, nose flaring, claws scraping at the floor, barking with a ferocity that sent chills through the room. This wasn't just a dog having a bad day. This was a dog sending a message. "Easy, boy," Sarah whispered, but her voice shook. Hunter's focus was like a laser, and Sarah felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. That's when Ruth, an elderly churchgoer who had been part of the congregation for over 50 years, leaned in and whispered, her voice trembling, "Something's not right, I've been saying it for years. There's something wrong with this place." The air in the church shifted. What had started as a peaceful Sunday now felt like the beginning of a nightmare. Hey, if you love stories about brave dogs like Hunter who stand up for the truth, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Heroes for Animals. Join our family and stay for the incredible stories of heroism and loyalty that will leave you inspired. Sarah tried to calm the room, but the tension was electric. Parents ushered their children out. Pastor James raised his hands, his voice booming. "Please, everyone, remain calm. This is God's house. Let's not allow a dog to create fear where there is none." But Hunter wasn't done. He pulled Sarah toward the edge of the pulpit, barking, snarling, his nails digging into the wood. His body was a coiled spring ready to snap. Sarah's instincts, honed by years of law enforcement, told her to trust the dog. But in front of the entire congregation, in front of Pastor James, the man everyone respected, Sarah hesitated, the weight of small-town pressure pressed down on her shoulders. Was she really going to let a dog make a fool out of the town's most beloved pastor? Then, as if to answer her doubts, Hunter did something that made her blood run cold. He snapped, his head toward the floor, and started digging right at the pastor's feet. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Pastor James's face turned pale. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, and he stepped back, a thin layer of sweat forming on his forehead. His voice faltered as he spoke. This is unnecessary." But Hunter wasn't letting up. His nose was pressed against the floorboards, and the bark that erupted from his chest was different now. A warning bark, the kind that said, "Danger. Now." Sarah felt her stomach twist. She knelt beside Hunter, her hand on his back, feeling the tremor in his muscles. This wasn't normal. Hunter wasn't reacting to some leftover sandwich or a rat under the floor. This was something deeper, darker. "Pastor James," she said, her voice steady but cold. "What's under this floor?" The pastor didn't answer. Silence fell over the room like a suffocating blanket. All eyes were on Sarah, on Hunter, and on the man they thought they knew. The choir, frozen mid-song, stared wide-eyed. A baby in the back began to wail. Then Ruth, her voice barely a whisper, spoke again. "I told you, years ago, I heard voices, crying, from the basement, but no one believed me." Hunter's barking surged, sharp and relentless. The floor beneath the pulpit seemed to pulse under the weight of secrets too long buried. Sarah's heart pounded. She looked up at Pastor James, who now stood stiff, his face drained of color, his hands clenched so tight his knuckles turned white. His eyes, once warm and welcoming, were now cold, empty. And Hunter? Hunter was ready to tear the floor apart, with his teeth if he had to. Sarah stood slowly, the room spinning around her, and said the words that sent a shiver down every spine in the church. "We're going to need a warrant." Sarah Miller stared at Pastor James, her mind racing. The weight of the moment hung heavy in the room, every eye in the church pinned on them like it was some kind of courtroom drama unfolding in real time. The small-town charm of Meadow Creek had been shattered, replaced by something raw, something unsettling. Hunter, the K-9 with a nose for the unthinkable, had unearthed a darkness no one was ready to confront. "Sarah," Ruth whispered again, her voice thin and cracking with age, "don't let this go. I've been praying for someone to listen." But listening meant digging deeper, and in a town like Meadow Creek, where everyone knew everyone, where potlucks and prayer circles tied lives together, that wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. Sarah felt it in her bones. The stares from the congregation were sharp, judgmental. Some shook their heads, muttering under their breath about that dog and how this was all just a misunderstanding. But Hunter didn't misunderstand. His instincts were honed for situations like this, situations where no one else dared to look. Sarah squared her shoulders and spoke with quiet authority, the kind that comes from years of holding a badge and knowing when to trust your gut. "Pastor, I'm going to need access to the basement." James's smile had vanished, replaced by a tight, almost pained expression. His lips pressed into a thin line, and a muscle twitched near his temple. He shook his head slowly, voice low but firm. "Deputy Miller, with all due respect, you're making a scene in God's house. There's no need to go digging into old rooms. Those basements haven't been used in decades." Hunter growled, a low guttural sound that rumbled through the quiet like distant thunder. Sarah felt the vibration in her hand as she kept a grip on his collar. The dog's body was tense, his ears pinned back, eyes locked on the floorboards, as if they were whispering secrets only he could hear. Sarah glanced around, reading the room. Some faces looked concerned, others defiant. A few members of the congregation, mostly older women, exchanged nervous glances, clutching their purses tighter. One woman, younger, with a baby on her hip, hurried toward the door, whispering a prayer under her breath. It was clear this wasn't the kind of thing folks around here wanted to believe. But Sarah wasn't in the business of keeping things neat and tidy for appearances. She was in the business of finding the truth. "Hunter," she said quietly, unclipping his leash. The German shepherd bolted forward, nose down, tail rigid, barking sharply at a small, worn door at the back of the sanctuary. The sound echoed through the old wooden beams of the church, making people flinch. "Sarah, that's enough," James barked, stepping forward, his voice cracking under the pressure. His hands trembled as he reached for her arm, but she stepped back, her eyes narrowing. "Don't touch me, Pastor," she said, her voice steel. "This is now a police matter." Hunter pawed at the door, barking louder, more insistent. Sarah's pulse quickened. She pulled out her radio and called for backup, her voice steady, even though her heart pounded in her chest. "Unit 3 requesting additional officers at Trinity Baptist. We've got a situation that requires immediate assistance." The response crackled back, standard code, but it was enough. Sarah turned back. To the congregation, her tone measured but firm. "I'm going to ask everyone to remain calm and exit the building in an orderly fashion. We'll continue our investigation outside." The tension broke like a snapped wire. People shuffled out, some muttering prayers, others openly whispering accusations or denials. Ruth stayed rooted in her pew, her hands folded tight as if in prayer, eyes locked on Sarah with a mix of fear and hope. Once the church had mostly cleared, Sarah approached the door. Hunter sat at attention, his eyes flicking between her and the floor as if begging her to understand. She tried the knob. Locked. "James," she said, turning to face the pastor. "I need the key." His hands twitched at his sides, the sweat now glistening on his forehead. I don't have it. That door hasn't been opened in years." Sarah tilted her head, studying him. His pupils were dilated, his breathing quick. Hunter growled, a deep warning sound that felt like it came from the earth itself. Sarah stepped back and called over her shoulder, "Officer Daniels, get a crowbar." James flinched, but didn't move. His shoulders sagged, and his eyes, those once warm, reassuring eyes, turned cold. Empty. As Daniels pried the door open, the hinges groaned like they were waking from a nightmare. A stale, musty smell wafted out, mixed with something metallic, something foul. Sarah's stomach churned. Hunter's bark exploded, sharp and relentless, as he lunged toward the dark stairs leading down into the basement. "Flashlights on," Sarah ordered, and the beam from her light cut into the darkness. The stairs were steep, narrow, and covered in dust, but there were signs. Scuffed wood, a torn piece of cloth caught on a nail. Hunter took the lead, his paws barely making a sound as he descended, nose twitching furiously. Sarah followed, every step heavy with the weight of what they might find. At the bottom, the air was cooler, damper. The flashlight beam danced across old crates, stacked hymnals, and something else. Sarah's breath caught. There, against the far wall, was a stack of wooden crosses, some broken, some scorched at the edges, like they had been burned in some twisted ritual. Hunter moved to a spot on the floor, sniffing, barking, then digging with frantic paws. The floor wasn't concrete. It was old, warped wood, and beneath it Sarah could see dirt. Her skin went cold. Daniels joined her, crowbar in hand, prying up the planks as Hunter barked harder, more frantically. The smell hit them first. Decay, faint but undeniable. Sarah's flashlight beam trembled as it settled on something protruding from the dirt. A scrap of fabric, faded and tattered, with a delicate lace edge. A nun's veil. Her breath hitched. She knelt, brushing the dirt aside, revealing what looked like bones. Small, delicate, unmistakably human bones. Daniel's voice cracked as he whispered, "What the hell is this?" Sarah's hand tightened on Hunter's collar, grounding herself as the room seemed to spin. The weight of the discovery settled in like a lead blanket, suffocating in its horror. She looked up at Pastor James, who now stood at the top of the stairs, his face pale, his hands gripping the railing so tightly his knuckles were white. His voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "You weren't supposed to find them." Sarah's breath was shallow, her pulse roaring in her ears. The basement smelled like old secrets, thick with the weight of years gone by. Dust floated in the flashlight's beam, dancing over crates of forgotten hymnals and cracked wooden chairs. But it was the sight of the bones, small, delicate, unmistakably human, that had the room frozen in a terrible collective silence. Hunter stayed close, his body tense, ears pinned back. He wasn't barking anymore. His low growl rumbled like distant thunder, as if he knew the weight of what lay beneath their feet. Pastor James stood at the top of the stairs, silhouetted against the dim light from the sanctuary. His voice was barely a whisper, ragged and broken. "You weren't supposed to find them," he repeated, his eyes hollow, almost glassy, like a man caught in a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. Sarah's voice cracked through the heavy silence, sharp and clear. "Who are they, Pastor? Who are they?" James's lips trembled. For a moment it looked like he might speak, but then his gaze dropped and he turned, retreating up the stairs, his steps slow, defeated. Sarah called after him, "James, don't walk away." But he didn't stop. His shoulders hunched, as if the weight of his secrets was too much to bear. Hunter let out a sharp bark, snapping Sarah back to the moment. The scent in the air, damp earth and decay, was thick, clawing at the back of her throat. "Daniels, mark the scene," she ordered, her voice steady, even though her hands trembled slightly. "We're going to need the forensics team, the coroner, the whole 9 yards." Daniels nodded, swallowing hard, his eyes wide as he radioed for backup. He tried to steady himself, but the sheer horror of what they had uncovered seemed to drain the color from his face. Sarah took a deep breath, her flashlight steady as she swept the beam across the room again. The floor was uneven, old boards, warped and sagging with time. Hunter moved toward a far corner, his nose low to the ground, tail stiff, his body vibrating with tension. He let out a soft, warning bark, then began to scratch furiously at the floorboards. Sarah approached, heart hammering. She knelt beside Hunter, gently pulling back more of the dirt. Another scrap of fabric appeared, this one a tattered piece of linen with faded embroidery. Sarah's throat tightened. She had seen enough crime scenes in her career to know what they were dealing with. This wasn't just a random burial. This was intentional. A secret someone had tried desperately to keep buried. Hunter's nose bumped against something solid. Sarah's fingers moved through the dirt, revealing a small rusted locket. Its chain snapped, the surface tarnished. Carefully, she opened it. Inside was a faded photo of a young woman smiling shyly, wearing what looked like a nun's habit. Sarah's blood ran cold. Hunter barked again, urgent, leading her to another section of the floor. She followed, brushing dirt aside, her fingers shaking. Another set of bones, smaller this time. A shiver rippled down her spine. "Dear God." "Daniels," whispered behind her. Sarah stood, wiping the sweat from her brow. Her voice was tight, controlled, but her eyes burned. "This isn't just a crime scene, this is a graveyard." As the backup arrived, the scene turned into a flurry of activity. Officers cordoned off the area, cameras flashed, evidence bags filled. The town's coroner, Dr. Ellis, a gruff man with a soft heart, arrived and knelt beside the uncovered remains, his face pale. "These bones have been here a long time," he murmured, running gloved fingers over the fragments. "At least a decade, maybe more." Sarah's mind raced. 10 years. That would have been around the time Pastor James came to Meadow Creek. The timeline snapped into place like a cruel puzzle. She turned to Ruth, who had followed quietly down the stairs, her frail hands clasped tightly in front of her. "You said you heard voices. What else, Ruth? What else have you heard?" Ruth's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Late at night, crying. Sometimes, I thought I heard singing. Like a hymn, but soft, almost like a lullaby. I told the Yao, others, but they said I was old, that I was imagining things." Sarah's stomach churned. This wasn't just a crime. It was a pattern, a ritual almost. A darkness hidden beneath the cross and hymnals of Meadow Creek. Hunter paced, his tail stiff, his ears flicking. He stopped, stared at the wall and let out a sharp bark, his paws scratching at the brick. Sarah's brow furrowed. "The wall?" Daniels approached, flashlight sweeping the bricks. They looked old, but something felt off, too smooth, too uniform. Sarah ran her fingers over the surface, then knocked gently. A hollow sound answered back. Her breath hitched. "Get the sledgehammer," she ordered. Daniels moved quickly, adrenaline sparking in his eyes. With a grunt, he swung the hammer, the wall cracking with each blow. Dust filled the air, and after several hits a section caved in, revealing a small bricked-up chamber. The smell that hit them was worse, the sickly sweet stench of death mixed with mildew and old rot. Inside, in the dim flashlight glow, they Saw them. Bundles of cloth, tattered and stained, stacked haphazardly. Sarah stepped closer, her throat tight, and reached for one. As she unfolded it, she froze. Inside was a rosary, a cracked crucifix, and a small leather-bound journal. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The pages yellowed and brittle. The handwriting was neat, careful, and the first entry sent a shiver down her spine. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. I have broken the vow. They know. They must be silenced." Sarah's stomach clenched. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was too dark to fully comprehend. "Behind her," Ruth whispered, her voice barely a breath. "The sisters, they used to say, 'Beware the shepherd who hides the wolves.'" Sarah closed the journal, her jaw tight. Hunter sat beside her, his eyes dark and unblinking, as if he too understood the gravity of what they had uncovered. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Sarah stood, her voice steady and sure. "We're going to get to the bottom of this, no matter what it takes." Hunter barked once, sharp and resolute, as if to say, "I'm with you, every step of the way." And in that dark, musty basement, with the weight of secrets pressing down from every wall, Sarah knew this case had only just begun. The air outside the church was heavy with the smell of damp earth and the low hum of police radios crackling through the evening air. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the street as the small crowd of townsfolk lingered on the sidewalks, murmuring and whispering among themselves. Flashing red and blue lights painted the faces of worried neighbors and curious onlookers. Meadow Creek, a town where nothing ever happened, was now the center of a storm. Sarah stood just beyond the church steps, arms crossed, staring down the man who had once been the most trusted figure in town. Pastor James sat on the tailgate of a police cruiser, hands cuffed behind his back, his shoulders hunched like a man who had aged a decade in an hour. His glasses sat crooked on his nose and he stared at the ground, lips pressed into a thin, pale line. Hunter sat beside Sarah, still and alert, his dark eyes never leaving James. The dog's breathing was steady, but every so often his ears twitched toward the pastor as if he were listening for something no one else could hear. "James," Sarah began, her voice calm but edged with steel, "you need to tell me what happened down there. Who are they? And why are they buried under your church?" James didn't answer right away. The sounds of the investigation behind them, the rustling of evidence bags, the low murmur of officers marking bones and collecting artifacts, filled the silence. The scene was controlled chaos, a crime scene that had exploded out of nowhere. Finally, James spoke barely above a whisper. "It wasn't supposed to be like this." Sarah stepped closer, her boots crunching on the gravel, arms folding tighter. "Like what?" James lifted his head slowly, his eyes hollow, the weight of years pressing down on him like a stone. "They came to me, broken, desperate. They wanted refuge, forgiveness, but they brought darkness with them." Sarah frowned, her instincts prickling. "Who are they?" James's voice cracked. "The sisters. The nuns. They came from another church from up north. They said they were on a mission helping women escape bad situations. They needed a place to stay, somewhere safe. I thought I was doing God's work." Sarah's heart twisted. Ruth's whispers, about voices, the old hymns at night. It all started to make sense, but it wasn't adding up. "So what went wrong, James? Why are there bodies in your basement?" James clenched his hands behind him, the cuffs digging into his skin. His breathing quickened. "It started with a young woman, maybe 20. She came to them for help, but she knew something. She had secrets. They said she needed to be silenced." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "You're telling me the nuns, they killed her?" James nodded, a tear slipping down his cheek. "They called it a purification, Said she had sinned too greatly to be saved. They convinced me it was righteous and that we were doing God's will. Hunter let out a low, uneasy growl, and Sarah felt her skin prickle. And the others? She pressed, voice tight. James swallowed hard. One after another. Women, young girls. They'd come in desperate, looking for help, and if they didn't fit the sisters' standards, they disappeared. I didn't ask questions at first. I didn't want to know. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. And you let it happen. James's voice broke, barely audible. I buried them. I buried them all. I buried. For a long moment, Sarah couldn't move. The weight of his words pressed down like a ton of bricks. The man everyone in town trusted. The man who had baptized their babies, married their daughters, stood at their hospital beds. He had buried their secrets under the floorboards of God's house. Her voice was low, steady but furious. You could have stopped it. James looked at her, tears streaking down his face. I thought I was protecting the church, protecting the community. I didn't know how to stop them. They were so convincing. Sarah's gaze hardened. Convincing enough to let you bury 10 women? James crumbled, sobbing now, his body shaking. Hunter shifted, pressing his head into Sarah's leg as if grounding her in the moment. She reached down, absently scratching behind his ear, her mind a storm of fury and disbelief. Behind her, Daniels approached, his voice quiet. Forensics is still working, but we've got preliminary IDs on 2 of the bodies, both reported missing years ago. This is going to blow the lid off the whole town. Sarah nodded, her eyes never leaving James. Yeah, it's bigger than him. I can feel it. She turned to Ruth, who had been standing a few feet away, hands wringing her shawl. You said you heard things, saw things. Why didn't you come forward? Ruth's eyes welled with tears. I tried. Lord knows I tried. But no one listens to an old woman when she says the walls whisper at night. They told me it was my imagination, that I was just lonely. And Pastor James, he always told me everything was fine. To pray for peace. Sarah's jaw tightened. Meadow Creek wasn't just a small town. It was a place where secrets festered under the surface, where faith had been twisted into a weapon. Hunter barked sharply, turning his head toward the church. Sarah's eyes followed, heart pounding. The building stood dark and heavy, its steeple piercing the darkening sky like an accusation. The church wasn't done talking yet. Sarah could feel it. She exhaled slowly, looking back at James. You're going to tell me everything, Pastor. Every name, every lie, every secret. And we're going to rip it all out into the light. James closed his eyes, a shudder running through him. They're still out there, he whispered. The ones who told me what to do, they're still out there. Sarah's blood ran cold. Hunter let out another sharp bark, as if to say it's not over. Sarah nodded grimly, her voice steady and cold. Then we'll find them, and they'll answer for every single life they destroyed. As the stars blinked into the night sky over Meadow Creek, Sarah stood with Hunter by her side, ready for the long, hard road ahead. This wasn't just a crime scene anymore. It was a reckoning. The weight of the investigation pressed down on the small town of Meadow Creek like a suffocating fog. The church, once a place of refuge, now stood cordoned off in yellow tape, its stained glass windows dark and unwelcoming under the pale glow of streetlights. The air smelled of damp earth, gasoline from police cruisers, and the metallic tang of unease that clung to everyone working the scene. Sarah stood just outside the church, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as she watched the forensics team work in methodical silence. Hunter sat beside her, his body tense, eyes darting toward the shadows, as if he expected danger to crawl out of the darkness at any moment. His nose twitched with every shift of the breeze. James sat in the back of a cruiser, head bowed, his shoulders shaking in quiet, hopeless sobs. Sarah had no sympathy left for him, not after the confession he'd given. But James wasn't the end of the story. He was just the first crack in a dam that had been holding back a flood of secrets for far too long. Daniels approached, his face pale but determined. "Got something you'll want to see," he said, holding out a small evidence bag. Inside was an envelope, yellowed with age, the edges frayed. Scrawled across the front in neat handwriting were the words, "For Pastor James's eyes only." Sarah's stomach twisted as she took the bag. She pulled on a pair of gloves, opened the envelope, and slid out a stack of old photographs. Her breath caught in her throat. The photos showed women, young, middle-aged, some barely more than girls, all wearing simple clothes, eyes downcast, standing in what looked like a dimly lit room. The backgrounds were nondescript, brick walls, wooden floors, but the sense of fear in their faces was unmistakable. Some had bruises visible on their arms, others clutched rosaries so tightly their knuckles were white. Hunter let out a sharp bark, startling Sarah out of the trance. She looked down to see him staring hard at the photographs, then back up at the church. "Good boy," she muttered, her voice tight. She turned to Daniels. "We've got to figure out who took these and why." Daniels nodded. "Already ran a quick search through missing persons. Some of these faces match women who vanished from towns all over the state over the last 15 years. This isn't just Meadow Creek. It's bigger. Much bigger." Sarah's stomach churned. A cold fury settled in her chest. This wasn't some isolated incident, this was a network, a machine that had been running in the shadows while everyone looked the other way. "Where's the pastor's phone?" she asked. Daniels handed it over. Sarah scrolled through, looking for anything that might connect James to the others involved. It didn't take long. There were messages, cryptic but clear. Phrases like, "The sisters await your report," and "The harvest must be tended." Her fingers paused over a recent text. It read, "Deliver the package, usual location." Attached was a GPS coordinate. Hunter barked again, ears perked, as if sensing the tension spike in Sarah's chest. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She tapped the coordinate into her phone's map. It pointed to a farmhouse on the outskirts of town, an old abandoned property that most folks in Meadow Creek probably hadn't thought about in years. She turned to Daniels, her voice steady and sharp. "Get the team, we're moving now." Daniels called it in, and within minutes a convoy of police vehicles was rolling through the darkened streets, sirens off, lights low. Sarah led the way, Hunter's nose pressed to the cracked window of her cruiser, eyes focused and intense. The farmhouse loomed ahead, silhouetted against the moonlight. It was a decaying two-story structure, the paint peeling, windows boarded up. The front porch sagged and an old swing creaked eerily in the wind. They parked a good distance away, weapons ready. Sarah knelt beside Hunter, clipping on his harness. "Stay sharp, buddy. We don't know what we're walking into." Hunter licked her hand, his breath steady, and Sarah felt a flicker of reassurance. If anyone could sniff out the truth in this mess, it was Hunter. They approached the farmhouse slowly, boots crunching on gravel. The air felt electric, as if the land itself held its breath. Sarah raised a fist, signaling the team to stop. She listened. Faint sounds, a low murmur, almost like chanting, drifted from inside the house. Hunter growled, low and dangerous. Sarah's pulse pounded in her ears. She signaled for Daniels and two other officers to flank the sides, while she and Hunter crept toward the front door. The chanting grew louder, an eerie rhythmic hum that made her skin crawl. She peered through a crack in the boards and froze. Inside, a group of women in plain dresses, nuns or something like it, stood in a circle, their hands clasped, heads bowed, murmuring in unison. In the center of the room lay a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Sarah's blood turned to ice. It was moving, slightly but unmistakably. Hunter barked sharply, and the women's heads snapped up, eyes wide, faces pale and drawn. One of them, a tall, gaunt woman with sharp cheekbones and cold, dark eyes, locked eyes with Sarah through the gap. For a split second her expression was unreadable, then she whispered something to the others. They scattered. "Go, go, go!" Sarah shouted, kicking the door in with a crack. The team flooded the room, weapons raised, voices booming commands. The women screamed, some lunging for the bundle, others scrambling for the back door. Hunter surged forward, teeth bared, barking furiously. He lunged at the tall woman as she tried to flee, his jaws locking onto her arm, dragging her to the ground with a snarl. Sarah rushed to the bundle, heart pounding, and carefully pulled back the cloth. Inside was a young girl, maybe 7 or 8, her eyes wide with terror, gagged and bound but alive. The girl whimpered as Sarah freed her, pulling her into her arms. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now," Sarah whispered, voice trembling. Hunter stood over the captured woman, his body rigid, breath coming in sharp bursts. The woman glared up at Sarah, her voice cold and venomous. "You don't understand. We were saving her. You've doomed her soul." Sarah stared at her in disgust. "No, you're the ones who are doomed." Hunter growled low, a sound of pure warning, and as sirens wailed in the distance, cutting through the still night air, Sarah knew this wasn't over. Not yet. The sun rose over Meadow Creek like a quiet apology, casting warm light over a town forever changed. The church, once a symbol of faith and safety, now stood as a grim reminder of the darkness that had festered beneath its floors. Yellow tape fluttered in the breeze and news vans lined the street, their cameras capturing the faces of locals still in shock. Sarah sat on the front steps of the sheriff's office, a steaming cup of coffee in her hands, her body aching with exhaustion. Hunter lay at her feet, chin resting on his paws, his eyes half closed but alert. Always alert. His ears twitched as reporters whispered nearby, but his gaze stayed locked on Sarah, as if to say, "We did it." They had uncovered the truth, but the weight of it was heavy. 10 women buried under the church. The ring of so-called sisters, a twisted network that spanned beyond their small town. The rescue of the little girl, Emma, still clinging to Sarah's jacket like it was a life raft. And Pastor James now, sitting in a jail cell, facing charges that would haunt Meadow Creek's history books for generations to come. Sarah exhaled slowly, the coffee warming her hands but not her heart. She looked down at Hunter, scratching behind his ear. "You saved that little girl's life," she murmured, her voice rough. "You saved us all." Hunter let out a soft huff, almost like a sigh, and Sarah smiled faintly. There was still work to do, there always was. But for now she let herself feel the quiet relief that came with justice, however incomplete. Across the street, Ruth sat on a bench, her hands folded in her lap, a faraway look in her eyes. Sarah rose and walked over, Hunter trailing behind. "Ruth," she said gently, "you were right. All those years, you were right." Ruth looked up, her eyes glassy. No one wanted to believe an old woman. It's easier to look the other way. But sometimes the truth comes for you whether you're ready or not. Sarah sat down beside her. "Did you ever think it would end like this?" Ruth shook her head. "No. I thought the past would stay, buried. But the Lord sends his messengers in unexpected ways. Sometimes they come with a badge, and sometimes with 4 paws and a bark loud enough to shake the heavens." Hunter perked up at that, his tail giving a small thump against the ground. Later that afternoon, Sarah met with the DA. Charges were being filed: conspiracy, unlawful imprisonment, murder. The investigation was growing, spreading to other counties as leads poured in. Survivors came forward, their stories overlapping in chilling detail. Women taken under the guise of sanctuary, silenced for not fitting into the mission. The little girl Emma sat quietly in a corner of the sheriff's office, coloring on a notepad. Sarah had sat with her for hours the night before, assuring her she was safe, that the bad people couldn't hurt her anymore. Emma had barely spoken, but she clung to a small stuffed animal someone had given her and occasionally glanced over at Hunter, her eyes softening each time. Hunter lay nearby, calm but watchful, as if guarding her. By evening, as the town slowly began to settle, Sarah took a quiet walk through the church's basement one last time. The boards had been ripped up, the evidence collected, but the air still felt thick with something, like the echoes of the past clung to the walls. She stopped in the center of the room, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. Then she opened them and looked at Hunter standing at her side, his eyes steady and sure. "We did good, didn't we?" she whispered. Hunter's tail wagged gently, and for the first time in days, Sarah felt the tightness in her chest loosen. Back outside, the town had begun to gather, candles in hand, forming a quiet vigil on the church lawn. People stood shoulder to shoulder, some praying, some simply holding on to each other in the silence. Sarah joined them, standing in the back with Hunter by her side. She wasn't much for public displays, but this moment wasn't about her. It was about the town, the lives lost, and the courage it took to face the truth. The mayor stepped up to speak, his voice steady, but tinged with sorrow. "We gather tonight to remember those we lost, to acknowledge the darkness we allowed to grow in our community, and to promise, together, that we will never let this happen again. And to the ones who helped uncover the truth, Deputy Sarah Miller and Hunter, we owe you our deepest thanks." The crowd turned, applauding softly, a few cheers breaking through the somber quiet. Sarah nodded once, humbled, while Hunter simply sat there, tail sweeping the grass, looking like he had always known this day would come. As the vigil continued, Sarah stepped aside, kneeling beside Hunter and pressing her forehead to his. "Thank you," she whispered, the words heavy with meaning. "For not giving up even when we were all too blind to see." Hunter licked her cheek, his breath warm against her skin. He didn't need words to tell her they were a team, and they would keep fighting for the ones who couldn't fight for themselves. Thank you for following Hunter's story, an emotional journey of courage, truth, and the unbreakable bond between a K9 and their handler. Now it's your turn. Have you ever had a moment when you had to stand up for the truth, even when it was difficult? What would you have done if you were in Sarah's place? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to Heroes for Animals for more incredible stories of bravery and loyalty. See you in the next one.